Well, good afternoon. This is wildlife biologist Eric Orff with New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife. Well, on this fine June day, I thought I'd dig into my diaries and look at a bit of history that involved this building. This is called the White Farm, the state's New Hampshire surplus farm, where they dispose of surplus property for the state. But let me back up a little bit to December 12th, 1981. You know, New Hampshire became famous for its annual roadkill auction. So we would gather roadkills in our freezers. At the time, there were a half a dozen New Hampshire Fish and Game fish hatcheries with walk-in hatcheries around the state. And during the year, we would collect roadkills or animals that were confiscated by the law enforcement division and freeze them. And in the late 70s and early 80s, the fur market was very good. Fisher is an animal here that is trapped in December, but we would end up with a few carcasses of fisher, and some of those fisher pelts were worth as much as $200. So I figured out that we should try to sell the fur carcasses that we had in the Fish and Game freezers. So on this day, December 12th, 1981, it looks like I picked up Henry Laramie and Armin Verville. He actually ran the state surplus program at the time. We didn't have the auction here. We actually went to the New Hampshire Trappers Association annual December fur auction up in Plymouth. So we joined the New Hampshire Trappers to sell our fur. And according to my diary here, some of the fisher that we had went for $200 up to $230. So, but we only sold fur bearer carcasses that year. And I also see that we sold a raccoon for $48. So in December of 1981, we made some money. Now, beginning the next year or the year after, I began collecting not just fur bearer carcasses like fox and coyotes and otter and mink and fisher, but we also had a number of roadkill bears. Now, I was the black bear biologist beginning in 1978, so I collected bear carcasses in order to remove a tooth from the bear and to examine them because I was the black bear biologist in New Hampshire. Well, we always ended up with 10 or a dozen or more black bears each year as well in the freezers scattered around the state. So come the fall, I would contact our staff, our Murray Fay and Walt Stevens, our bioaides, and we would advertise that a particular day we were going to hold a roadkill or a fur auction, a bear and fur auction. So the animals from around the state were brought down to Concord, then to headquarters, and we would simply tag them. And the first year or two, again, it was mostly the fur buyers. I remember Bill Spear from Massachusetts was one who would come and buy a number of the fur bearer carcasses, and I think he bought some of the first bears as well, as I recall. But it gained some notoriety, and then by around 1985, we actually moved the whole operation here to the White Farm here in Concord. So same thing, Murray Fay, Walt Stevens and staff would go around to the walk-in freezers and very carefully remove the animals. We didn't want the claws broken or the teeth broken because they were actually available. So even though you have a roadkill bear that might be pretty well beat up by whatever it collided with, there was some value in the teeth and claws. They make jewelry and things like that. So they had some value even if it was quite beat up. But certainly any of the better bears, they certainly wanted the fur to make to have it tanned. So the last several years, we had the annual auction right here. We would collect the animals, and I would go around and tag them all, line them up, group 10 or 12 bears, the fisher and raccoons and foxes and coyotes. And on that grand day, the last year or two, it got to be quite a well-known affair. In fact, as I recall, it was right 1988 or 89, it made some news and drew people from far and wide. Now that year, I remember Murray Fay was trying to pull a joke. he had collected somewhere, I don't know, a star-nosed mole. So they're only about the size of my finger, 2 or 3 inches long. But what the heck, I put a tag on that mole and laid it out. And guess who bought the star-nosed mole? 2 witches from Salem, Mass. Yes, we had witches at our roadkill auction. Don't think the star-nosed mole was a roadkill. But in the later years, in the early 90s, the Yankee magazine did a whole article about how New Hampshire was so thrifty that they actually sold road-killed animals, and it has since made the press a couple more times. So the New Hampshire Fishing Game roadkill auction was well known and has been widely written about, and the last 2 or 3 years it got more popular and was a very interesting thing to operate and to be a part of, and I'm glad I was.